Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Production funding for Common Ground is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Common Ground. I'm your host, Ashley Hall. Common Ground is a new weekly series that highlights northern and central Minnesota culture. We'll explore the unique people, places, and events that are an important part of our region. Each week, Common Ground videographers, editors, and myself will take viewers on a journey of exploration into the world of arts, history, and culture. This week, we're exploring what transportation in the North Country was like during the early 1900s to the 1960s. A rural Pine River potter shows us just how rhythmical pottery can be, and two watercolor artists splash a little color into our lives.
I've always had an interest in art. It's just been part of my life that's always been. My paintings are mostly about two things, color and texture. When I use my watercolors, I don't stick to just using the paints. I use a lot of found objects, and I like to use a lot of color. Now, I let it run. I like it to drip. This is why I have paper on my desk, because I make a mess. You can tell it's dry when it feels warm.
Well, I'm going to paint a picture of daisies, and I'm going to start with my background. This is just spider webbing that you get for decorating at Halloween. When it's done, it gives it a good veiny, random, kind of more interesting background to it. It's just going to give the paint something to travel around on, and it'll leave an impression on it. This is phthalo blue, and I have watercolors. I try to use colors that are staining and are really clear. And this one is a phthalo green. It's also really staining. It's hard to lift up again once you get it down. Once this dries and gets mixed with all of the water that I've already sprayed on here, it'll be so much lighter, so you want to start out with it really vibrant. I'm just going to tip this and get these to mix a little bit more on here.
Since I'm going to do leaves, I need to decide what kind I want to do. So the hardest thing for me in any painting is deciding what I want to do, because there's so many options. Draw your shapes on. I use a lot of found objects, things like gauze, just anything I can find for texture.
Once it's dry, you'll have something like this. And I just like to take a look at it and see which way looks up, where I'm going to start things. I take pictures, and then this is how I keep my sanity in our winters. I take a lot of photographs. I enjoy them for themselves, and I never really see any good reason to try and make a painting look just like one. I even think I think in color sometimes. Seeing stuff that's really interesting to me, or even feeling things, and then going back and being able to paint a picture of it instead of having to come up with how to say it. It's just so much more comfortable.
Now that's dry, and I get to go back to painting. That's one thing fun about watercolors is you can put more and more layers on and add to the colors. See if I can find a leaf shape over here. I try to go back and forth from one area to the other so that when one part's wet, I can work on the other side while it's drying, and then vice versa. Okay, I'm using a stamp that has the love poem on it, and then after I get the gold on there, then I'm putting an embossing powder on. I need to take a heat gun, and I'm just going to put heat to the words, and it's going to make them stick out a little more.
And with the watercolors, they look totally different when they dry than when they're wet, and you can't cover up mistakes. So I take the tact of just deciding not to call them mistakes and not to have too set of an idea ahead of time. And that's just, it's good lessons for me to figure out how to just work with whatever happens, not worry about whether it's a mistake or what was supposed to happen.
I'm just really laying things out right now to see what kinds of things I might want to put on there. Maybe I'll use a piece of this. This kind of makes a mess. Okay. I think I'm going to add some blue. I'm at the point now where I usually let it sit and I just think about what I want to do. Look at it, which is what I have to do to know what I'm doing. Just to finish it up and make it a little more bright and finished looking, I'm going to use this 3D paint on it, and I'm just going to kind of outline my focal point. Basically, your focal point has the darkest that you have your painting, and there's also the lightest right around the focal point. And the lightest part of my painting is right in here. So that kind of lets you notice the focal point the most. I think I'm going to call that good.
I work with a stoneware clay that's produced from continental clay. It's kind of a gritty, all-purpose clay body. You can use it for throwing, hand building, sculpture. It's real versatile. The process is all kind of coming together as I'm making or thinking about what I need to make. Shape, dimension, proportion, use, you know. And then once I actually start making stuff, then that all changes. And by the time I'm actually throwing pots, then I start thinking about finishing. And sometimes, you know, it's determined by what kind of commissions I'm working on at the time. So, you know, my creativity sometimes is bound by necessity too, which, you know, it's part of being a professional artist, I guess. Sometimes you just do what you have to do. Yeah, this is sort of also a nice warm-up time for you in the morning and the studio's getting warmed up. You're kind of figuring out what I'm going to make for the day. Today I'm going to work on a couple of commission projects I have going. I've got an account with a pub down in Cross Lake, and I build them their beer steins. So I'm just going to throw the forms of those to get warmed up. And I need to make some tall vases to fill in my kiln. So to fill up the rest of the kiln firing. So I'm going to work on some sort of elegant vase shapes. A lot of times when I come into the studio, I'll start with smaller shapes first and get warmed up. A lot of times I'll make mugs or bowls. And today I'm making these mugs because I need to get them done. But yeah, you can see how these are kind of a nice warm up, and I can kind of experiment with the proportions and different shapes. They're fun to do. Yeah, it's fun to watch it transform. I've always enjoyed watching videos of other potters making stuff, because I kind of forget. From my perspective, it's a little different than watching it. I remember when I first started doing it, just looking in books and magazines about how to make pottery, like how-to books and things. Just being fascinated by the transformation of the material. But I like the community aspect of it, and it's just fun to think of all those people down there having a good time drinking out of my mugs. There you go. All right. Well, maybe I'll make a couple of these vases. So these are a little bit more tech. Take a little bit more time. So wedging over there was a pretty crucial part of the process, and this is probably one of the most important steps. It's the foundation of any shape that you're going to make on the wheel. Centering. It centers the clay into the middle of the wheel head, and it kind of homogenizes it and gets it ready to throw. You can see how it's just running smoothly through my hand. You're actually compressing the clay into the centermost point where it can't go up, it can't go down. It just is what it is, but it's just spinning perfectly. I always really stress this step. And it's one of the hardest things to learn, centering. Okay, now you can see how the form is kind of generic right now. I'm going to heat up the rim of it so it's stiff. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to belly this form out. And as I'm forming it out, it's going to put a lot of tension on the top. So by drying it out a little bit first, it'll make it stiffer so it'll hold its shape better. So I'm going to fire up this torch here. And this is something that I just learned throughout making shapes like this. It just helps. It's not that I have to do this, it just helps a little bit. Makes it a little easier. It also makes it so that I can go to a little bit more extreme with the shape. See it steaming. But now you'll be able to see how I can work with the lower part of the shape now a little bit more without affecting the top, because if I'm swelling this out, that top's going to stretch too. This helps me to be able to do a little bit more with it. And this is an important part to get the profile right, because once you get it off the wheel, you can't go back. I'm stretching it out, applying pressure from the inside out, bellying out the form, and I'm catching that pressure with this rib on the outside to create a nice clean profile. I'm creating the form that I'm going to make by stretching this rib with my hands. I like forms that are real refined and kind of smooth. I do use texture in my work at times, but lately I've been making things that are a lot more clean lined and kind of smooth. I sort of have I definitely have a palette of surface treatments and colors of glaze and different effects that I can get, and sometimes I'm more into earthier stuff, other times I'm making things that are a little bit brighter, more colorful. But finishing the pieces has always been the most challenging part for me. Making comes a lot more naturally to me than trying to make those decisions at the end where, what color is this going to be? What texture is it going to have? And once you make that decision, that's it, It's fired and it's set in stone. You can't do much with it after it's out of the kiln. One of the things that I find is a real challenge with making pottery is how do you keep from the separation between the form and the surface? And how do you integrate them both so it's one thing? A lot of times I see work that it's like the glazed surface is something different than the form. I've been trying to make work that's utilitarian, yet the surface and the form are more integrated. It's hard to integrate that without it looking like something that was applied to it. Make it still look organic or still, part of it, like it grew onto it or it was meant to cover it. Some people just are out of place in a really nice dinner dress or something. I feel kind of uncomfortable sometimes in a tux or something, but maybe the pottery is the same.
The Jefferson Highway was a main highway running all the way from Louisiana to Winnipeg, and it ran close to Bemidji, but it was the main highway through this part of the country. Several of the old car club members went out for a photo op along the Jefferson Highway. One of the individuals that was with the photo op, his dad graded the roads and helped build the Jefferson Highway, and he said that through the swamps, he was, in the wintertime, would lay these logs down and then dig some of the peat and then sand and clay. And so the original highway was a corduroy highway that was running on top of logs. So it was pretty rough, but it was the best thing they had at that time. I think I've always been interested in old cars. I kind of remember back when I was 16 years old, I wanted a car so bad. I needed a car, and I talked with Dad, and Dad says, you won't get anything but into trouble with that. So then I talked with an uncle, and he says, we'll see what we can do. Now one day when my brother and I came home from school and nobody was there, and there was not a note, and they always left notes, and here about 2 hours later in came the folks and my older brother driving this 31 Chevy. My uncle had found it, had 25,000 miles on it, and they paid $30. That was my first car, and I still have it today. The cars in my lifetime were really pretty good. The heaters were getting a little bit better, and they were handling pretty good. And then especially 50s, you got better heaters, and you got power steering, and you got, the modern conveniences. But I do remember when I was a little kid, and my dad had a Model B Ford, which would be 1932. That thing was pretty cold, and you didn't go that far, although it was way better than anything they'd known before, and people headed across countries with them. They thought they were great. The next car that Dad had gotten was like a 38 Chevy, and we thought that thing was wonderful in comparison to, the earlier one. And each one improved a little bit. When we look at this Model T right back here, it was still the best thing they had. It was certainly beat horse and buggy, and it would go a long ways, and people traveled all across the United States with these things thinking they were wonderful. But you had on this particular one where it only had a cloth top, and then they made kind of like a plastic for the side curtains. It was kind of an ice curtain to put up there for rain and snow. You didn't have any heaters. You have a lot of gas heater things that were like a little pillow, so you could put your feet on them in the back seat or front seat if you weren't the driver, so your feet would stay warm. I have a 29 Buick, and in the back seat has a bar that would come down so your feet wouldn't have to be on the floor, and so your feet wouldn't get as cold, and then you could put a quilt around it. And so they came with all kinds of inventions. I have a 1927 Chevy, and that one has a heater that it's kind of along the exhaust manifold, and so the fan blows air through, and so you're getting the hot air right off of the manifold. But the danger was if you had a leaky manifold, you're gassing yourself. And so it wasn't real safe that way. A lot of people that get into the restoration of just like license plates. I've always eaten Wheaties all the way through my whole life. In the 50s, you could get a license plate, and at that time, each state had their colors. It wasn't where you had a whole mishmash, so you don't even know what state they're from anymore, but everyone had their own color, and you could get these in the Wheaties box. And then if you'd had so many coupons, you could order the whole set, and I think it came into parts of the country, and I ended up with a full set of all of the United States, plus all of Canada, plus all of the countries that the United States had a presence in. And these were sitting in my sock drawer most all the time, and I think right before they put up the exhibit, I ended up mounting them on an old weathered board, and I intended on putting a frame around it and stuff, but put them on the board, and so it was an interesting display, I think. As a boy, they used to have a lot of the plastic models, and I'd be putting them together, so I appreciate it. As a teacher in the industrial technology department, we started a program called professional model making, and it was one of the first and only ones of the type that we had across the whole United States. And so I appreciate just the workmanship and so on of the models. The models have gotten so popular now because they say that the people that used to put these together, like myself, and the kids now are dealing more with computer games and stuff like that instead of working with models. But where you can buy them for, they run all the way from upper $30 or around $30 to, if you get a real intricate model and collector type of things, that it's over $100 per model. Cars had several things that were the big parts. One is the headlights, where they were brass and very showy, and then hood ornament. And again, the hood ornaments that I have here aren't all that fancy, but you would have like the bird right in the back there that came off, I believe, an early Studebaker, and Pierce Arrow and so on. Even had like an Archer with a fine line, and these things are worth many thousands of dollars now for the people that have collected those. But the hood ornament was a big part. And then we have the motor meters, and again, that was to show if the car was boiling, and so it has an actual thermometer so you could see, and it has where it's a little window, and if the red line gets in there like a thermometer, you can see it from your driver's seat, even though this is at the front of the engine, you know. And so you're able to know, hey, we got to do something here, it's getting too hot. So yeah, you have a lot of interesting things. And then I think in the 50s and so on, the dashboards were so interesting, so much chrome, and I know there's a lot of books on the art of the automobiles, and especially of the 50s. The dashboards and stuff were absolutely gorgeous, so just fun looking at those. Chrome and so on was just, through the 50s, was just wild. And wide white walls and so on was all the flair, and just loaded on, especially when you get to the mid-60s, 50s rather, 57, 58, loaded on chrome like crazy. This bumper came off of a 56 Cadillac. The bumper on these things, these little bumps, were called Dagmars, and those were basically after the Marilyn Monroe of the 50s. And basically it was Dagmar that kind of resembled a little bit of this part of the bumper. And it's, again, about 150 pounds of weight that you're hauling around, that you push it, you're paying extra gas to push the car with, needed a bigger engine. Most of the car companies went nuts. The earlier cars, many of them were in the $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 range, which back in the early teens was very, very costly. You know, would be equivalent to the $40,000, $50,000 cars we have now. Around here, you'd find a lot of the more inexpensive cars. In the wealthier parts of the country, you'd find the fancier cars. People, guys probably, but women too, love cars, and it's kind of a, you know, a thing that really makes your heart pound for those that do like them. We want to have it as a family thing, kids and moms and dads and the works. It's a hobby, and where a person is kind of saying that this is part of history, and I really enjoy, you know, saving some of that.
We hope that you enjoyed taking a step back in time and learning about all the pockets of creativity right here in the Northland. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Common Ground. If you have a segment idea for Common Ground, please contact us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3022. Funding for Common Ground is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.